and objectives of the funding round, the commissioning and procurement processes, as well as provide an opportunity to ask questions and share feedback. So really looking forward to your participation. Before we get to the presentation in earnest, just a bit of housekeeping. Please note that the session is being recorded for dissemination purposes, and particularly to make it available to those who aren't able to attend today. We will be sharing slides and FAQ summary with registered participants, so don't worry about needing to copy all the content. We'll be sharing that around. During the session itself, please use the Q&A function to enter questions at any time as we go along. We will be monitoring those questions and addressing them during the dedicated Q&A portion of the session. There's also a general meeting chat, which we'd encourage you to use to introduce yourself and make connections if you'd like to. We know we have lots of interested participants in this area and would really encourage building those links. Although please note that we won't be monitoring the meeting chat for questions. So if you do have questions or feedback that you'd like to be addressed in the meeting, the best place for that is the Q&A function. I will also, in the interest of building relationships as well, I'll be sharing the participant list afterwards with our resources to participants. But if you'd like your details removed from that list, please don't hesitate to send to me an email. My address is there. The default setting is to be muted. So if you would like to ask a question during the Q&A session, feel free to raise your hand and one of the meeting hosts will unmute you to be able to jump in and contribute with that question. But yes, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the screen. And a final note that live captioning is available through the captioning function, again, at the bottom of your screen. Please note as well that this is an early market engagement event, so all the information shared today is indicative at this point, and it may change before the final tender is published. But we will provide updates on that. In terms of what we'll cover today, we'll start with a presentation of the funding round before opening for questions and feedback. As I mentioned, this research program encourages partnerships between researchers, practitioners, and government decision makers, as well as comparative approaches across contexts. So we've set aside some dedicated time towards the end of the session for networking and exploring potential partnerships. So if you'd like to, I encourage you to use the chat function to introduce your work or your organization and potentially what experience or expertise you might be looking for in a project partner. And we can use that time at the end of the session to spotlight some of these. This is the project team across 3IE and FCDO that you'll be hearing from at various points in the webinar today. And so on that note, I will pass to Thomas to say a few words of introduction from 3IE.
Thank you, Christine, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Excuse me. I'll be very brief. My name is Thomas Kelly. I'm the Director for Evaluation Policy and Learning at 3IE. And I just wanted to say on behalf of the Research Commissioning Center how excited we are about this work and the fact that FCDO has identified this work as a priority. From a personal perspective, I spent many, many years inside of a bilateral donor, and it would be hard to understate how useful this research would have been during my years inside government and working for a bilateral donor to inform the internal discussions that we had and internal debates that we had inside our organization. More importantly, from a broader perspective, I happen to have been at a conference for the last 3 days on evidence use. And this conference brought together about 70 representatives of donors, multilateral, bilateral, representatives from governments in the Global South, researchers, evaluators, knowledge brokers, a group that was extremely interested in this kind of work. And despite the other themes that we were meant to discuss at the conference, it's precisely this theme on the need for research on the evidence for evidence use that was central to many of our discussions over the 3 days. So I just wanted to note that, to emphasize how important this work is, how much demand there is for this research, and also the enthusiasm that we have seen for FCDO's decision to support this work. So we're very excited to see this launched. And with that, let me return the word to Christine so we can start to get into some of the details.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thomas. And yes, I certainly share that excitement to be hosting this event and launching this program of work. Just a quick bit of background on the Research Commissioning Center as an entity. So the FCDO Research Commissioning Center is led by 3IE and the University of Birmingham, and is a partnership between the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and a consortium of nearly 30 top academic and international development institutions. And our goal is to be a world-leading commissioner of high-quality research that improves lives. And I'm sure many of you on this call have spent hundreds of hours applying for research grants and have sometimes been frustrated at the levels of admin or the requirements in submitting proposals, things like formatting CVs in a particular font or abiding by arbitrary word counts, complicated budget formats. And you may also be frustrated by the time it takes from an idea to be conceived until it can actually be delivered on the ground. There was an independent review on research bureaucracy that highlights these and many other issues that impede the speed and quality of research. And so the RCC is part of FCDO's response to addressing these recommendations. Through the RCC, we aim to reduce the administrative burden, accelerate access to world-class academics, and strengthen the ability to deliver rapid and responsive research commissioning, all with a focus on impact. This research program on evidence use in policymaking is the first large commission to come through the RCC. So as a fairly new funding mechanism, we do very much welcome feedback about how to improve the experience of applicants and deliver the highest quality research. So with that in mind, we invite you to consider these questions as we go through the presentation and share any reactions you have about the design or the process of the funding round. So this includes, are the proposed activities and the rationale underpinning them clear? Are the activities useful and relevant for policymakers in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia? Are there any other considerations that we've missed and should be included? What features of the commissioning process would you like to see or indeed not see to best facilitate your bid development? So things like how long might be needed to develop a strong proposal. What's your preference around the mechanism and sequencing of building project partnerships in relation to the application process? Would any additional information be useful to inform either your decision to apply or your approach to developing your proposal? So please do share any feedback either during this session or separately by email, and I'll provide my details again at the end. But to get into the research program itself, I'll hand over to Andy from FCDO to provide a bit of background and rationale.
Thanks, Christine, and welcome everyone. It's really good to see so many people joining today. It's really good to see the level of interest in this topic, in this project. So my name is Andy Hinsley. I'm a senior economist in FCDO, and I lead the economic growth research team in our Research and Evidence Directorate. And we in FCDO and DFID before that have a long history of investing heavily in research to create evidence for use in development practice and policy making to drive growth and achievement of MDGs and SDGs. And at times we've also invested in programs to try and encourage and increase the use of evidence in policy making. And you can see on the slide there a couple of studies of past programs that we had in DFID days. on this topic in some of our partner countries. But there's still a bit of a gap in the middle around rigorous evidence on evidence use, understanding how evidence is used in development policymaking in developing countries, and what we as externals and what interested parties in developing countries can do to improve the use of evidence, the systems around evidence, the governance of evidence, and ultimately its impact for the objectives that we care about. And this is the gap that we're aiming to fill with this project, or at least start to tackle. There are clearly some sectors in development that have made more progress on these topics of evidence around evidence use. I think health, particularly as a sector, has traditionally been strong on this topic, and some others coming up behind. The whole area that my research team is focused on around economic growth and policy making for economic development has not done a great deal, or there is not a great deal of evidence, particularly rigorous causal evidence on what works to improve evidence use in policy making around economic development. So I think we'll get into the strands of research covering slightly different sectoral areas as we go. But essentially, we want to fund new research into this space, both to improve how we commission research and fund research, then how our partner programs drive the uptake and use of that evidence. But more broadly, we want to spur a greater understanding among development partners in multilateral institutions and in partner governments on how we can all improve the use of evidence for greater impact in development. So I'll stop there and pass back to Christine.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So yes, that's a perfect segue to going into the specific strands of this work in more detail. So just as a starting point, the team at 3IE, working in collaboration with partners, has undertaken a quite extensive scoping period to inform the research commissioning, which has included a rapid scoping review of existing theoretical and synthesis literature, a systematic review with Pan-African Collective for Evidence PACE on what works to increase the use of evidence for policy decision-making, and that will be published very shortly. We also conducted consultations with researchers, evidence intermediaries, funders, and senior policy officials in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia to learn from their experience. And we'll be drawing all of this together in a pathfinding paper to sort of suggest where, as Andy was saying, some of the key gaps might be. The kind of overarching insights from this scoping work were that the field lacks a shared conceptual framework and common taxonomy of interventions, and that previous research on the use of evidence in policymaking has often paid limited attention to the political, bureaucratic, and institutional context of policy decision-making, which we know is key. There's also very scant evidence from rigorous evaluations of innovations to increase the use of evidence in policymaking, particularly in LMICs. So a large opportunity there to really understand what works and test interventions concretely. But there's also no agreed set of indicators and outcome measures by which to assess evidence use, for example, to use in future evaluations. So these findings have really informed the design of the research program that we're commissioning through the RCC, which comprises 3 strands. The first is currently underway by a project team of RCC consortium partners, and involves developing an overarching theory of change to identify the constructs of interest in this space, and to be accompanied by a toolkit of robust measures and associated guidance that can be used to track and assess evidence use and the factors that facilitate it. So this we consider to be a sort of underpinning resource which will inform the commissioned research. The other 2 strands involve, respectively, studies of evidence use in practice and interventions to influence the use of evidence in policymaking. So I'll go through those in turn, but at high level, strand 2 involves identifying common conditions under which decision-making is informed by research evidence or not in economic policymaking in order to draw actionable conclusions on the factors or levers that enable that change. And strand 3 is impact evaluations to enhance empirical knowledge on how to improve the use of research evidence through the testing of innovations and interventions. And we'll be launching these in 2025, but again, welcome your feedback on the scope and direction that these are taking. So to go into more detail on both, strand 2, as I say, is examples of evidence use in practice off the back of this cross-cutting theme during scoping that really highlighted the lack of attention and nuance kind of paid to the political and bureaucratic influences on evidence use, and very few published policy case studies in economic policymaking in particular, as distinct from health and other sectors, as Andy was mentioning. So indicative research questions here include things like, what are the individual institutional and political factors that influence national economic policymaking in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa? What value do decision makers place on evidence and for what purpose? How do they access, select, and interpret evidence? How do they define evidence? Is there a shared conception of what evidence is? What actors within the policy ecosystem need to be targeted to institutionalize evidence use? How does political ideology and polarity shape policymakers' receptiveness to evidence-informed decision-making? And in what ways does the contentiousness of the decision affect the role of evidence? And there could be two starting points for studies here. We could be starting from a robust body of evidence and working forward to understand the influence that that body of evidence had on economic policy development, or the alternative approach to start from an economic policy change, reform, or process and look to understand the role of evidence in contributing to that outcome or process. And when I say policy development here, we're conceiving of policy being quite broadly, including agenda setting, policy decision-making, implementation, public spending, reform, regulation, etc. In terms of the geographic focus, as I've mentioned, we're looking at low and lower middle income countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Studies can take an individual country or a comparative focus, and with a particular interest in national economic growth. So sectors that contribute to economic growth, such as energy systems, high volume transport, industrial policy, labor markets, trade policy, but certainly not limited to these. We're also looking at policymaking at national government level, but could also include subnational level where policies have national implications for economic growth, which we know to be the case in many instances. And the scope could also include external evidence intermediary organizations in supporting national decision-making. In terms of study design, we expect these to be retrospective, so relying on existing policy developments or bodies of evidence, but could be designed in different ways depending on the question and objectives. So, for example, a qualitative case study, including interviews, focus groups, and document analysis, for example, or on the other hand, a secondary quantitative analysis, which tries to unpack relationships between different project characteristics and policy impact. And just to note as well, we're interested both in successful examples of research evidence translating into desired courses of action, but also cases of misuse, selective use, or lack of evidence use, and the factors that contribute to that, to understand what learning we can take from those examples. Moving on to strand 3, these are the interventions to influence evidence use, and again, driven by the observation that there's a rapid proliferation of evidence being produced and also approaches to enhance evidence use, but very limited impact evidence. So the the PACE through IE systematic review that I mentioned found just 18 counterfactual impact evaluations that had been conducted, and most of these came from high-income countries. So an opportunity here to really enhance our understanding of the effectiveness of different interventions that are being rolled out. So core research questions could include what interventions are effective at increasing the use of evidence in policymaking in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. What mechanisms do they operate through? How effective are evidence intermediaries, such as knowledge brokers, local research institutions, or embedded policy labs in bridging the gap between evidence and policy, and what strategies do they use? As well as questions around the institutionalization of evidence use, the importance of context and the role that plays, as well as the implementation costs associated with effective evidence use interventions. The geographic focus is the same. In terms of sector focus, we retain the preference for sectors important for national economic growth, but as the objective here is really to enhance our collective understanding of what works to increase evidence use in policymaking, we are open to proposals from any policy area. We'd also be really keen for studies that measure observable policy impacts as their primary outcome, as distinct from things like attitude, beliefs, and knowledge. But we welcome those to be included as proximal outcomes to understand the causal chain leading to policy developments. And we'd also very much welcome studies that examine the downstream impact on socioeconomic outcomes. So does increasing the use of evidence in policy ultimately translate to wider development outcomes, as we would hope it does. And a reminder that this will be informed by the Strand 1 work, looking at measures of available measures to be used as outcomes. The interventions evaluated could be new innovations, or they could be existing interventions that haven't been evaluated, and they could look to produce new research evidence that responds to the needs of policymakers, or focus on facilitating the use of existing research evidence. So I've listed a few example strategies under each one, including co-production, technical support, capacity strengthening, structural processes to change the evidence use culture within organizations such as embedded policy labs, for example, as well as rapid response units and technological innovations. But we welcome ideas that are appropriate to your context and are underpinned by a compelling theory of change. We would expect these to lead to evidence-informed decision-making. The study design can be prospective or retrospective, but we would expect a mixed method impact evaluation, again, appropriate to the needs of the study and the research question. These could include randomized controlled trials with a process evaluation to understand how and why we observe the results that we do. Or alternatively, a mixed method, small n evaluation of organization or system level interventions that don't lend themselves to counterfactual designs. And just to note again, we're interested in both the extent to which interventions increase the use of research evidence in policy processes, but also the quality of evidence use. So wanting to understand, was the evidence fit for purpose? Did it answer? Was it appropriate to the situation in which it was used? And so on. So quickly to summarize the project parameters, Strand 2 carries a maximum project budget of £200,000. We'd be looking at approximately 1 year kind of project duration from the signing of the funding agreement, and that would include deliverables such as the protocol, a presentation to FCDO, a final report, and a presentation of the final report. Strand 3 carries a maximum budget of £400,000 and about a 2-year project duration, but could be longer depending on the needs of the evaluation and the outcomes to be assessed. In terms of the anticipated commissioning process, we're in the phase of early market engagement at the moment, where we're introducing the funding round and gathering feedback. We anticipate publishing a draft terms of reference as well, to get comment on that as well before we finalize it. And then we'll be running a 2-stage commissioning process where we first invite expressions of interest, which will be screened on eligibility, alignment with the terms of reference, and expertise of the research team. And shortlisted teams will then be invited to submit a full proposal. And the final process post-award would be to conduct due diligence and contracting, which my colleague John will talk us through very shortly. But just to quickly summarize the dimensions of the assessment at each stage, the call will be open to any legally registered organization, but not to individuals, provided they have the requisite experience and capacity. There are no geographic restrictions in terms of where organizations need to be based, but we strongly encourage leadership of in-country research teams where the studies are undertaken. And proposals will need to demonstrate a very strong and nuanced understanding of the policymaking context. Organizations may apply independently or in collaboration with partner organizations. So I'll pass over now to John to talk us through quickly the due diligence and contracting requirements.
Thanks so much, Christine. And hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining this morning. My name is John Robson. I'm the Senior Program Manager based at 3IE as part of our Synthesis and Reviews Office, and I'm also responsible for the FCDO Research Commissioning Centre. As Christine mentioned, that this is the RCC's kind of goal is to develop and deliver a better way of research commissioning, working very closely with partners and encouraging kind of a more agile approach and hopefully a more responsive approach to how we do research commissioning. And we, again, with due diligence, we're aware that this can sometimes be a lengthy process. We can sometimes be requested the same information from multiple partners. So we're very wary of the fact that the due diligence process has to be, proportionate, so we have the information that we need in order for us to kind of go through the commissioning process in an efficient manner, but also to make sure that it is, sufficiently flexible in order for us to kind of work with you very closely when we go to getting to the start of a contracting process and beginning the actual work of the research. The due diligence policy sort of covers, there are 2 routes for this. For both these strands, they would likely go down the sort of fuller due diligence assessment process because of the value of each of the different strands. They cover the areas in which FCDO covers as well, covering governance, internal control, ability to deliver, financial stability, downstream delivery, and safeguarding. And then there are questions within each of these which cover a variety of areas, which we will of course work with you to clear up any questions that you might have, or to answer any queries about why we ask for this particular information and why this helps us to better understand the nature of the organization and help us to kind of move forward smoothly through the contracting process. This comes in the form of a questionnaire. There are various policies that we ask for. Hopefully none of these are any surprise to any of you. Hopefully you've had these before, but obviously these are just there to ensure that we understand the nature of the organization, that we want to kind of ensure that things are in place in order for us to go forward. We do, though, however, work very closely with organizations. We want to encourage collaboration on this area. If there are things that are not maybe in place, or if there are things that maybe that aren't exactly as we've asked for them to do, we will communicate with you. We'll work with you on that basis. We won't want it to slow down a contracting process. We're able to sort of, to work through the timelines to make sure that things are delivered. And so that there are ways in which we can, ensure that this process is as flexible as we can possibly be under the due diligence side of things. So this is the kind of the broader approach, and this will be the start of things. If you go to the next slide, Christine. Great. So as Christine mentioned, we have a 2-stage process. This was one of the recommendations from the independent review research bureaucracy, which obviously the RCC is part of this response to that on the FCDO side. We only require the actual budget at the proposal stage, so post the expression of interest stage, and that's when we would send out a template for you to complete. Obviously, a key metric of this is demonstrating value for money. We assess this at the review stage. We would want to make sure that that was embedded throughout the budgetary process, and there is guidance as to what that sort of the value for money approach represents. The way in which we assess costs, the unpermitted costs, we don't allow for per diems when it comes to travel. Those have to be on the basis of actuals. So we would ensure that that was costed into the proposals. We have obviously salaries and benefits included there. Those are split out, and there is guidance in these templates. There is one slight change to this in terms of the indirect costs and the approach that we take to this. So the RCC follows FCDO's non-project attributable costs method, which is NPAC, which is essentially a way in which we can understand the non-project costs of an organization that we can then trace back through the audited accounts and understand what those are. So that's the methodology that we would encourage partners and that we do ask for partners to use when applying for grants. Separately, if you are based in the UK as an academic institution, there's also the track methodology, which we would again, if you are a university based in the UK, that's what we would ask you to follow when applying for grants. Separate to that, if there is a different methodology here, there is a 15% cost ratio here. That's not correct. I should change that. So that is, if there is another way in which organizations do calculate indirect costs or have a way or a methodology which you're using to do this, we obviously completely accept that there are other ways to do this. There are other ways to ensure that those costs are recovered when budgeting for research proposals. So we would obviously welcome those costs, but we must ensure that those are then traceable back through audited accounts to give us an understanding of what those costs may be for your organization. So we would, of course, encourage you to use the impacts costing methodology when coming your indirect costs, the track for you as a UK university. But if there is a separate methodology you use, which we're able to assess indirect costs back through audited accounts, we of course would welcome that as well as an additional way in which to show those in the budget. And as we have some various processes that we follow internally, but hopefully these are all explained, and we do have guidance on this at the proposal stage. So hopefully this should be not a surprise to anybody and should be fairly straightforward. If you go to the next slide, Christine. Great. So it's brilliant to see that we have a number of consortium partners on the call, which is great, and others as well. So thank you so much all for joining. There is a couple of different methodologies here in terms of how we contract with partners. For consortium partners, we have a particular framework contract that is essentially sort of a way in which to engage as organizations in the RCC. And then once that framework agreement has been approved, there are sort of project specifications that would come underneath that, which include this, and they include the sort of the key deliverables and disbursements. Those contracts are then, working with those partners, we would then engage them, through that contract. This is just a different way in which we would do it. These have been set up for the partners within the consortium just to find a way to work closely with those partners when we are doing that. But just to reiterate, this is obviously an open commission. This is open and it's a competitive commission that we would encourage everybody to apply for. This is just to kind of give an explanation of the different ways in which we would then work with the different partners, depending on whether you are a consortium member or not. For new partners, the way in which we contract with you is through an accountable grant agreement. This is, again, very similar to FCDO's. It covers a lot of the same clauses that would be in FCDO's accountable grant agreement. And we would send that over when we start the process of contracting as soon as the award has been made. Obviously that would then be reviewed. We would also supply a copy of this at the proposal stage for you to review early on, post the expression of interest. If you are invited to apply, we would supply a template of this for early review, just to see if you are happy to kind of abide by the conditions within that agreement, which then hopefully later on down the line that allows us to be a bit more agile and flexible when it comes to the commissioning process. There is the deliverable and disbursement schedule, all sort of fairly standard templates in there, and then that's included. And there's the disbursements, as sort of said before, this is all based on actuals, so based on deliverables, and we would work with you on that and to propose that schedule once we had that in place with the contract. As mentioned before, our goal is to be agile. Our goal is to work with you. Our goal is to make sure that these are proportionate, that we work very closely with you to make sure that these are clear and these are understood across the board. So we would obviously work, very hard to make sure that this was explained at the start of a project. And if you did have queries or questions on any of this, we would work with you on that basis as well. I'll be here as part of the event, so if there are any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A, and I'm happy to answer those. And we can also, if there are any questions I can't answer, we can come back to you afterwards as well.
Wonderful, thank you, John. So that brings us to the end of the content that we had prepared to share, but we are very, much looking forward to your questions and feedback at this point. Just a reminder, these were the particular prompts that I shared, but I can see questions coming in to the Q&A as well, and I will stop sharing my screen so that people can also raise hands and start to ask anything that they want to. A reminder as well, I can see people using the chat to introduce themselves and their organizations. So yes, do definitely have a look at who else is here, and a reminder that I'll be sharing the full participant list at the end, unless you opt out with me. So let's turn to the Q&A. I'll just have a quick look at what's through. Suvarna, I think you had identified a question to start with. Would you mind introducing that? I can't see the chat function for some reason.
Yes. Yeah, maybe we can start with the first question is on how we are thinking of evidence. So if we're including monitoring and evaluation, that was the first one. And then...
Thank you, very good question. So we've currently defined evidence to focus specifically on research evidence, because that is in line with the type of things that the FCDO and the RCC would expect to fund, but it could be anything from sort of conceptual evidence through to end stage impact evaluations evidence. Obviously, this is set within a wider context of other types of evidence that governments might rely on in terms of monitoring and evaluation, citizen evidence, administrative data, and so on. So particularly for strands 1 and 2, we'd want to understand the full evidence ecosystem and how research evidence is situated within that wider context. But I think in terms of the types of transfers into policy, that would the subset of research evidence would be the particular focus. But do jump in, Andy, or anybody else. There's further perspectives on that.
Is that working? No.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes,
Great. Yeah, slow computer today. Yeah, I completely agree. I think particularly strand 2. We want to understand the influences on economic development policy making, which will include rigorous evidence, as well as monitoring and evaluation, as well as a whole bunch of other different influences. So strand 2 is definitely encompassing the wider set of influences around policymakers and policymaking. Of which rigorous evidence is just one, and agree on the third strand. I think many of the organizations and institutions and interventions that we would want to be studying under strand 3 will not only be seeking to boost and increase the use of rigorous evidence, but also other kinds of evidence. So that the process of evaluating and understanding those interventions can very helpfully capture that wider set of activities, but we wouldn't want to be studying interventions or processes that are only working at that M&E level. We'd want them to be definitely working at the rigorous evidence end as well.
Great, thank you. I can see a question that's just come in about specifying the countries that are the focus of the call. So right now, we have a regional focus of low and lower middle income countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So no particular target countries at this stage that we're particularly focusing on. But at the shortlisting stage, decisions I think will be made on a portfolio level. So we'd want to make sure that we have a strategic distribution of countries represented within the research that we commission so we can maximize learning from the program. So that might mean ensuring the appropriate balance between breadth and depth, sort of understanding the comparative learning that we can draw from the different proposals that we come in, but certainly invite proposals from any low or lower middle income country across Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Again, Andy, please jump in if you have anything to add there.
Nope, that's great.
Super. I can see one that's come in. How many projects do you anticipate funding in each strand? So I think we have targets of about 8 to 10 in strand 2, the case study work, and up to sort of 16 to 20 in the strand 3. It will be contingent, obviously, on the proposals that come in and the distribution sort of at selection stage. But those are the internal targets that we're working towards. So certainly the potential to be a large portfolio. See some other questions. So we have a few on the finances, John. So one around, do permitted costs include taxes that the organizations are expected to pay in that country? And I thought I saw one about, are they total, is it spend? Patrick, I saw a question from Patrick Auckland about,
I can come in on those if you'd like, Christine, if you'd like to
are the
answer
amounts
those.
spendable, or are the amounts for projects? Sorry. Yes, please do come in. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. So I just provided a bit of an answer on the taxes side of things, but what we'll do is we'll come back with a bit more of a complete answer after the call to follow up, because it's a good question. So typically any kind of employer on costs that are included within staff gross salaries, those would obviously include taxes. Most often when you're calculating staff costs, those are eligible. However, if there are taxes that are reclaimable through other means, so in the UK we have, the HMRC, those, or potentially through another funder, those are not eligible to be claimed through the NPAC, through the non-project attributable costs in the indirects. It's a bit of a complicated answer. There obviously are others that may come up, but we will take that away and come back with a bit more of a complete answer in the background on that. The separate question, I think, from Patrick, I think there was a question around those amounts spendable, or they amounts per project. I'm not sure if that was, I wasn't quite sure what that meant on that side, if they are sort of spendable. I think those costs that we have provided in the total budget, those would be the ceiling for each of those different strands on the overall budget. So it's what we would expect to be, we wouldn't be able to go beyond those amounts in those two strands. That would be the amount that would be included, for example, within the budget, depending on your proposal, and that's as much as we would see. So that would be the amount that we are allotting to those projects. So I think that's what you were asking, but if not, please do add another question, and I'm happy to either type an answer or come back on here and answer that again.
Great, thanks, John. Going through some of the other ones, is there a possibility of it not being retrospective, but tracking a current policy and implementation process? So I think our thinking behind making them retrospective was that we'd be able to get at the learning quicker and be able to meet our sort of 1-year target of producing those case studies or analyses in strand 2. I can open to Andy if you think introducing current policy developments could be something that we can include.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I sort of, as we're talking about strand 2 here rather than strand 3 as a possibility. I struggle a little bit to see how it would be possible to tell a full story around how evidence has been used in a process if that process is not complete. Having said that, lots of the the major policy area we're aimed at here, national economic development, the policy decisions and processes in that are rarely completely one-off discrete decisions. These are often processes of reform and series of decisions that happen over a period of time. So if you're thinking that more in those terms, that this is a longer term ongoing reform process, and we can take in some sense a more discrete episode or more discrete chunk and conduct case study analysis on that defined period, then I think that would be admissible, potentially at least. So I would encourage you to put something into the expressions of interest around that, and if you can make a compelling case, then we'll be certainly happy to look at it.
Thanks, Andy. Just looking, there are a couple here on methods. Is there an appetite for other methods than those that we mentioned? The examples that I presented are certainly not exhaustive, so we very much welcome any method that addresses the objectives of the study and answers the particular research questions and fits within the broader parameters in terms of timeline and budget and so on. But yes, it was certainly not intended to place restrictions on what type of study we would be open to, provided it meets the terms of the call for proposals. And also to say that teams are not restricted to applying to simply one opportunity. If you'd like to apply in both strands 2 and 3, you'd be very open to, provided you can demonstrate having the expertise and capacity to carry out 2 projects, should you be successful in both. But yeah, no restrictions in terms of who can apply. Here is another question, perhaps for you, John. Is there a cap on the daily or monthly rate that can be charged?
Thanks, Christine. So we do have an indicative cost card, which we have used to assess value for money across the different rates. Obviously, we would use that when we were assessing cost, because obviously, as we mentioned, value for money is a key consideration when we are assessing the different proposals that come in. So we do have, a general cost card that kind of looks at the daily rates and assesses those against what we consider to be value for money, and that's including things like, expertise, background, the number of years of experience, the level of seniority that individual may have reached. So we do use that to assess those costs when they come in, to ensure that they are, providing value for money. There isn't an indicative cap as such, but we do obviously want to ensure that those are, relatively kind of well budgeted, and they do represent the cost that we would look to see for the different levels of seniority.
Thanks, John. We've had a couple of questions come in about the RCC consortium. So one about how can an organization become a consortium partner, and another about describing the role of consortium partners as distinct from new partners. Is that something perhaps, Bertram, you might be able to speak to?
Sure. So in terms of becoming a consortium, so I think that we encourage consortia to respond to the call for this specific call for proposals. And those can be made up of organizations within or outside of the RCC consortium. In terms of the role of the consortium, for the most part, it is as everyone else, that most of the work, the preparatory work in developing the call for proposals is conducted by core secretariat staff. So consortium partners are not involved in the details in a way that would give any additional insights. But we might use, and we will, well, we definitely will use consortium partners for peer review of applications, for example, obviously taking into account potential conflicts of interest for those that are also intending to apply. In terms of the joining the consortium, so we are currently in a process of targeted expansion of the consortium, but we're not anticipating expanding it significantly. And also just to say that generally most of the work that is commissioned by the RCC will be commissioned openly for everyone. But we draw on the consortium to help with things like developing terms of reference and providing expert inputs and peer review.
I'm seeing a couple here on the geographic focus. So one on will be prioritizing cross-national proposals or international collaborations, and another on will countries in the Middle East be included in target countries. So to tackle the first one, so for strand 2, we are very open to cross-national multi-country studies that take a comparative approach, looking at policy developments in multiple contexts. And so in that case, we'd very much welcome sort of international collaborations. But it's not required. Proposals can take a single country approach, and like equally for strand 3, we would expect those to be just focusing on a single intervention. The most important criteria for the research team is that leadership is demonstrated in the country where the research is taking place, and that there's a very strong foundational knowledge of the policymaking context. So whether that comes from an international team or whether that comes from a single country team, the most important aspect is sort of demonstrating that expertise. In terms of the Middle East focus, perhaps I could turn to you, Andy, about whether that will be a future area of focus in this topic.
So we don't have any future plans at the moment. So I can't give any steer on what might happen in the future beyond what we're planning through this project, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
So, Christine, there is a question around particular outcomes of interest. So perhaps you could say a few words about the strand 1 work and how we envisage that to influence strands 2 and 3.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you for the question. So we are currently conducting a review as part of strand 1 to understand what outcome measures have been used in previous evaluations, as well as what indicators and tools exist to track and assess evidence use. And as I say, that includes kind of end-line outcomes in terms of policy developments, as well as proximal outcomes around policymaker attitudes, capacities, beliefs, values, and so on. And so we're currently conducting a mapping exercise to understand what exists currently and the extent to which existing measures and tools have been validated or have some underlying rationale for them. And we're also using this exercise to identify where there might be gaps in measures, so things that we would like to be able to track and observe, but don't currently have a means of doing so. So we would make this toolkit available to evaluators applying in strand 3 to be able to understand what measures exist in this space and an assessment of their quality, and work with those teams to kind of decide what measures to use. In the ideal scenario, we'd be looking to kind of standardize the measures that are used across the portfolio so that we have some way of generating cross-learning. But until we have the strand 1 work, it's sort of hard to predict what position we'll be in, but we'll certainly be sharing all of our insights and the toolkit to inform proposals in strand 3. That's helpful.
And perhaps I can, so there was a Patrick Ockwin from eBay's had put several questions through, and I answered just one of them in the Q&A before I hit send. So the second question is around how competitive will this be for homegrown innovations? So I don't know if that's something that Christine or Andy, you can speak to. Then there is a question, how can we apply as a consortium? How does due diligence apply in this case? So for that, we certainly encourage consortia, particularly partnerships between research organizations and implementers. In terms of the due diligence, we would expect that is, so we would do due diligence on the lead and would expect the lead to handle due diligence for the downstream partners. But yeah, over to Christine and Andy for the question around homegrown innovations.
So I'm not entirely sure what Patrick means by that. So Patrick, if you want to stick your hand up, it'd be good to hear from you. That the hosts can allow you to come on screen while you're doing that. I definitely don't think that we want to be bringing a best practice solution from our context here that is transplanted to developing countries. We want a particular outcome, which is improved policy through the use of evidence or evidence influencing policy making. That the mechanisms through which those happen clearly need to be highly contextually dependent. So if your question is around innovation in the mechanisms through which evidence is brought into that policymaking process, and whether they are locally developed and locally encouraged and rolled out, then yes, absolutely. But if I'm misunderstanding the question, then please do come online or write another comment.
Thanks, Andy. I'm not seeing Patrick coming back, but do feel free.
So I think Patrick has raised his hand, but this is a question for tech, whether it's possible to actually allow Patrick to speak. I think that would be the easiest way to get a clarification on the question. Abik, is this something we can do?
Yes, Abhishek, could you please allow Patrick to speak?
Can you repeat the name, Avik?
It's
Patrick
Ockwin.
Okay. Yep, now Patrick.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Yes, so I had actually raised up my hand when I posted the questions because I knew that bit would be a little bit tricky to communicate. So in essence, we, from our experience working across the evidence ecosystem, we found out that using the approaches that are actually coming from the global north, both for evaluation, for research, knowledge generation, evidence generation, evidence translation, and evidence implementation or evidence uptake and use were tended to be limiting to our context. So along the line, we've developed a number of innovations that can complement those approaches that we use from the global north. However, the challenge has always been articulating this in the applications because it's new to those who are reviewing the proposals, who mostly are coming from the global north, And so we tend to have this challenge. So what we do is we try to find opportunities like this to talk about it so that those who may be reviewing may know beforehand that if we are conducting a randomized control trial, for example, this is just an example, we would be looking at maybe using certain characteristics of participatory research which have been homegrown. Or if we are trying to get evidence into use by policymakers, we need to take certain considerations like how do we cajole policymakers? How do we get policymakers in the driver's seat? And we may use approaches, tools, or methods that are very different from what you've ever known. And maybe we only have reports on those, maybe we've published on those, but this will probably be something that will not be familiar to you or may not also be familiar to the people who will be reviewing the proposal. That's just the point there. Thank you.
Okay, it's slightly hard to respond to that without getting into the details and perhaps looking at some of the resources you're talking about, but please do include those sorts of locally developed approaches in your expressions of interest. And if there are links and documents that you think would be helpful to include to help the panel that will be looking at the proposals, the expressions of interest, to understand the approaches, then include those as well. But yeah, until or unless we get into some more detail on that, it's hard to comment on our view on exactly what you're talking about. But thank you for raising it.
Thank you. And yeah, again, just to emphasize and reiterate that we are certainly looking for locally driven and context-specific examples and innovations. So we'll certainly welcome those. And I guess slightly relatedly about how do we believe the research outputs will be accepted or owned by governments, and how can the learning be taken on in the policy space? So we would expect proposals to include a dissemination plan, and that's one of the dimensions that will be assessed at the selection phase to make sure that there is a clear and explicit link between the research and translating that into policy learning. We would also very much encourage research teams to include government decision makers and policy experts in their teams directly to make sure that that perspective is represented and that there are links and relationships and networks with relevant government actors. But again, if Andy, you have any other thoughts on that one, do jump in.
Yeah, I wonder if we've been consulting with a variety of policymakers in low middle income countries as we've gone through this process. And one network we've tapped into is the Chief Economist of Government network that the World Bank acts as the secretariat, but it's a network of current and past Chief Economists of Government across Sub-Saharan Africa. I wonder if maybe we should be, so we're aiming to do matchmaking as part of this process, and there'll be a bit of time later in the call for people to come on screen and introduce themselves and hopefully be able to make some links. Maybe we should think about doing some similar information sharing process with networks of policymakers who've already shown interest in this topic, who'd be willing to have their details shared with potential researchers to make matches. I mean, ideally, we'd want researchers applying who already have good links with policymakers and are able to implement an intervention or study an intervention that is deeply embedded in that policymaking process already and can bring those links to the table themselves. But perhaps we should think about some additional matchmaking on that side as well.
Great. Yeah, we can certainly take that away. And if anyone here has any suggestions of how we can deepen those links, we certainly welcome those. I guess here's another one perhaps for you, Andy, on the economic growth focus. So there's one question on, are we only looking at policies like tax reform, privatization, etc., or policies that can also enhance human capital growth, skills and education, and so on?
I would, yes, it's a question of where to draw the line. I think the more social sector, if you will, approach to health and education perhaps has been slightly better studied on some of these topics already, and there are quite a number of institutions and organizations working on evidence use around clinical care and I think primary education, probably particularly perhaps secondary education. I would certainly be interested in more labor market focused aspects of human capital. So programs around skills training and skills certification and labor market matching, seeking to use evidence around those. So if we think of a spectrum of human capital, from things that are more foundational through to things that are closer to labor markets and work, I'd certainly want to see them more at the latter end, closer to the jobs labor market side of things.
Thanks, Andy. And then I'm seeing one on, can we be more specific on timelines of when we'll release this different stages of the call? So as I mentioned, we're still working on the Strand 1 piece and the pathfinding paper, which will ultimately inform the final call documents. And so those will be completed early 2025, and we'll turn those around. We're also very open to feedback from potential applicants around the timelines that we should be planning towards, in terms of whether it would be helpful to have either a prolonged period in advance of the EOI stage or between the EOI and proposal stages to do things like develop consortia and work on proposals. So I very much welcome feedback either now or by email about what you would like to see in terms of proposal timelines, but the opening of the round will be dictated by the sort of foundational work that we are completing now. And so we should have an update early 2025. I will use this opportunity as well to flag that we have a dedicated project mailing list for this work. So I'll be sharing in just a second where you can find that, but that's where we'll be disseminating any updates and releasing any resources related to the round. So if you haven't already, I would encourage you to sign up to that mailing list so that you can keep up to date with all the developments. So just checking, we're at the time when we wanted to move to the proposed sort of partnership building part of the session. Are there any last burning questions that we haven't had time to answer? Yeah, I can see important to have time to develop consortia. So I guess on that transition, it would be great to use the last section to be spotlighting some participants and organizations that have joined the call and are playing a very active role in this space. So if anyone does want to come off mute and introduce yourself or talk a bit about what work you're doing or what partners you might be looking for in order to develop a project proposal, I would very much welcome inputs here. As a reminder as well, I'll be sharing the participant list. I'm aware that it's not visible, I think, to participants. It must be to do with the settings of the webinar, but we will certainly be sharing afterwards to enable anyone to follow up after the session. But would anyone like to raise their hand and say a few words about what you or your organization is doing. It could be an intervention that you're delivering. It could be a piece of research that you're working on. It could be something that you'd like to do if you had the opportunity. But the floor is yours if anyone would like to step in. Otherwise, we can continue with the Q&A.
Abhishek, could you unmute Qasim Shah, please? He's raised his hand.
Yes. Wait a minute. Qasim, you can talk now.
Thank you. It's Qasim here from STPI. At STPI, we have had a chance to work on the strengthening the evidence used for development impact, previously one of the FCDO funded program. And this was discontinued due to COVID and some other situations at that point of time. So we would like to take forward the work which we've been doing with the Ministry of Commerce at the national level in Pakistan. And that exactly we did this technical education thing as well as the child labor. And we were more focused on how the labor markets could be transformed actually by using the evidence and how it can strengthen the labor, social protection policies related to labor in the country. So this is something where we would be interested actually to take this work forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Qasim. So if anyone would like to respond or reach out to Qasim, the opportunity is there. And I see Patrick as well has a raised hand. Can we unmute Patrick?
Patrick, you can talk now.
Yes, thank you. So at eBase, we also do quite some exciting work in the evidence ecosystem space. And we are really excited to see this call, and we believe we'll be going in for this. And I think we already have some prior experience with the due diligence process with 3IE. So I think most of what is requested there, we've gone through with 3IE in the past. We also work across several countries, so we are also sure that even if the number of countries that these projects will want to work in Africa, we will be able to stretch out across, we will be able to find ourselves in at least one or two of them. We already are having some people talking with us in the background about possibilities of collaborating on these projects, and which we think is very exciting. And we have this strong possibility of engaging both English and French-speaking African countries, and also countries that speak local languages like Hausa, Fulfulde, and Swahili, especially when we go across these consortiums that we are looking at forming. So this is something we are really looking forward to, and happy to also hear that there is the dedicated mailing list for this call. So we may have to maybe come back at some point if we have some further questions. But I think really what we would like to have is the recording of this session, so we could listen to this over again and then familiarize ourselves as we develop the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And yes, always exciting to hear eBase's work in this area. We will be sharing the recording. We'll be making it available afterwards. So yes, it will definitely be there to reference. And as I say, we'll also be sharing written Q&A document with a summary of all the answers that we've provided today. So rest assured, all of those resources will be published. But I can see a few more people wanting to jump in. Can we start with Jeffrey Weir?
Hi, Jeffrey, you can talk now.
Yes, please. Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Yeah, hi. So sorry, yes. Thank you. So this is Jeffrey Wire. I'm a lecturer at Mbara University of Science and Technology in southwestern Uganda. Actually, but as a university, we have a very strong commitment for community engagement, and therefore what that entails that we work closely with policymakers and local partners within the ecosystem. So I'm excited about this, and we are looking out for partners who would really love to work with us in this call as we move forward. I was so much interested when Andy talked about labor access to human capital. That's for, I think, in strand 2, because I've seen for a long time now, many of the youth who graduate and just within the local ecosystem are moving to the Gulf states to seek for better opportunities. Unfortunately, when they come back, most of them come back when they're sort of devastated. And my word has just been, if somebody tends to lose hope at the age of maybe 20, 30 years, what will happen in the future? So I'm really very much interested in it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Jeffrey. I can see Ian Goldman as well with a hand raised.
Hi, Ian, you can talk now.
Okay, so hi there. So my name is Ian Goldman. I've got many hats, so I need to explain them a little bit. So I've got links to the universities of Cape Town and Witwatersrand in South Africa, and I'm working part-time in the presidency as the M&E advisor on the just energy transition, and so very interested in the policy processes on that side, which is why I raised those points, Andy. And but on the other hand, I'm president of the International Evaluation Academy, and we're really interested in trying to understand how evaluation can contribute much more effectively to addressing the poly crisis. And so interested in how evaluation can be more impactful. And that means rethinking models of evaluation, and as well as rethinking the sort of use interventions. And I've written and co-edited a book on evidence use in Africa, drawing very much from the sort of behavior change framework around how evaluation use happens. So we'd be very interested to explore with others who are interested in taking that role about how we use evidence in the future, and how, in the context of increasing uncertainty and increasing unpredictability, we use evidence, which is why, you know, the lessons from the past are one thing, but the lessons for how we use evidence going forward as policy making and decision making becomes much more unpredictable, that's what we're particularly interested in. So if the partner's interested in that, we'd be interested to collaborate with you on that.
Fantastic, thank you, Ian. Yes, that sounds like lots of interesting prospects there to join forces. I can see as well Ndun Wokolo, apologies if I'm not pronouncing anyone's name correctly.
Okay, can you hear me? Good morning, everyone.
Yes, we can hear you. Hello.
Yeah, you got the name right, so don't worry.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, Ndun Wokolo from Nestia. Nestia is a consulting firm based in Nigeria, with offices across some of the countries in West Africa, like Liberia, Sierra Leone, and so on. So first to say that this is an area anyone who is a Nigerian should be interested in. Anyone who is from Sub-Saharan Africa should be interested in. Why? We work with government where we get things done, and then we now start looking for the evidence. Or how did we get there? So, and it's an area a lot of consulting firms like ours are trying to find a way to solve that problem, especially working with town and Ghana at the same time. So I know it will be an interesting area. However, for next year, we're currently doing some work around impact investing. We've had funds from GIZ to do that work in Nigeria. And I think because of some reforms by the new government in the area of taxation, electricity, and so on, people are asking a lot of questions. Most times, government is not even able to say why he's doing what he's doing. So that's why when you were talking, Christina, I thought I saw the political economy coming out as well, even though it's not directly what we're looking at. But you can't remove that from trying to solve an economic growth in countries like this. So Nestia will be interested in finding a way. And I'm happy when you say get those in government to be part of your team. Why? Because it's not about doing a research that some guys or some folks will put in the shape. Nobody uses it. So bringing them to be part of the journey is halfway saying that we'll get them to use whatever thing is the outcome. I live in the UK, I live in Nigeria, and there's someone who pays taxes in both ways. I wouldn't want UK taxpayers to put their money somewhere for someone who is not going to use their evidence of the research. So making sure that we get those in government to join as part of the process will be interesting. So next year will be interested in those who will work with us in things like the impact investment, especially even where you're looking at the power sector. How do government make those decisions? These are some of the evidence we should be looking at and find a way to start bringing them forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and great to hear your interest and engagement in this topic and the enthusiasm for this work in Nigeria. So yes, I hope you get many opportunities to collaborate. I can see a couple more raised hands. James, Kariuki, and Gumo.
Hi, James, you can talk now.
Thank you. Thank you. Jambo, this is James Kariuki Gumo from the Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, here in Nairobi. I am so excited and following up on this call since the time we came from Cape Town, South Africa. For the last 3 years, we have been looking at the evidence use across public health managers, and I work and I champion evidence use in a devolved setting. Healthcare in Kenya is devolved. And number two, we're in a state of transition. So that tells you all the sectors are in a state of transition. Number three, there is a generational shift from the old managers who are about 50, 60 years to relatively younger managers. And these younger managers are asking critical questions. This call, which I'm so excited to participate, will allow us to be able to study the behavior, the organization, and the cross-sector collaborations with others like water and the water sector, environmental and agriculture. So it will be a very interesting call, to evaluate, but more specifically, even to come up with a robust indicators or M&E indicators for evidence use in a public sector setting. Therefore, we'll be looking for consortium. Already we're in partnership with the eBase. We're doing some work with eBase and PACE South Africa. Thank you so much, Kwaherini.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And fantastic to follow up from South Africa and hear the work that you're interested in, and really excited to be hearing about all the ideas and all the potential applications that could be developing. I see Robert Wamyala has a hand as well.
Hi, Robert, you can talk now. Hello. I think Robert.
Oh,
Okay,
there we go.
okay, well,
Yes, we've got you, Robert.
perfect, perfect. It's exciting, exciting to be here. I'm Robert Wamala from Uganda, Makerere University. I'm the Director for Research and Graduate Training. Of course, coming in from a university where we have 3 major roles, and that is number 1, teaching, number 2, research, And then number 3, community service, and that's the mandate of actually most academic institutions. I could say with confidence that we're doing so well in the teaching and in the research. However, one of the biggest gaps actually has been how we can transform this research into evidence that would basically be able to inform policy. And so to me, it was really quite exciting hearing about Strand 2 in particular. And I'm looking forward to partnering with several institutions in how well actually we can, as an institution, as a region, we can transform our research to basically inform policy rather than just relying on just the scholarly publications, which we, of course, do so much like. But I'm just looking forward to innovative ways of how we can inform policy through our research. So thank you very much for the call and considering inviting Makerere University for this briefing. Over to you. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robert. I think we're unfortunately out of time, but it's been so rich to hear everyone's excitement and expertise and ideas about where to take this forward. I do also encourage you to look at the chat. I've seen others that are inputting there in terms of what their organizations are doing. And as I say, we will continue to facilitate these conversations after the session. I'll just quickly post a slide with my contact information and where you can sign up to the mailing list for this call, in case you haven't done so already. Hopefully that's now showing. So yes, do feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm at ckelly@3ieimpact.org with any further questions or feedback. And that is the link that you can access the Research Commissioning Center information and sign up to funding alerts for this particular opportunity. But I want to thank you all very much for joining our session today. I hope it was useful. Again, do feel free to share any feedback about any further information or activities that we can be providing as we lead towards launching this very exciting funding round. But I wish you all a good rest of the day, and thank you very, very much for your engagement and participation. Sharing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very
Thanks
much
all. Bye.
Thank you.